Taehyung sat at the head of the long mahogany table in the dimly lit room, which smelt strongly of cigar smoke and hummed with whispered conversations. His presence commanded respect, and his sharp eyes scanned the faces of his loyal men as they discussed the most recent business strategies. The meeting was in full swing when the large double doors creaked open, grabbing everyone's attention. YN's best friend stood at the threshold, a shocked expression on his face. His eyes widened as he took in the sight in front of him. YN, his dear friend, sleeping peacefully on the LP of the notorious Mafia boss. What the HURL, he said under his breath, his mind racing to make sense of the situation. He had known YN for years and trusted her with his life, but now? What? This was beyond what he could have imagined. Taehyung's expression, at reddened as he met the perplexed gaze of YN's best friend. He gently brushed a strand of hair away from YN's face, and his expression softened as he looked down at her. The room became silent, the tension palpable. Care to explain, Taehyung?
The best friend eventually demanded, his voice a key but determined. What is she doing here, and why is she? Taehyung curled his PS into a knowing smile. She's my wife, he said calmly, sending shock waves through the room. And this, he said firmly, is where she belongs. The best friend staggered backward, his mind reeling. How did he miss this? The secret glances, the hushed conversations, ... Everything made sense now. He looked at YN, who was still sleeping soundly, unaware of the storm brewing around her. As the gravity of the revelation set in, the best friend realized that their lives would never be the same. Loyalties would be tested, secrets would be revealed, and friendship and love would be urged to their limits. And at the center of it all was YN, the woman who had won the Mafia boss's heart, the soft SN0 race from YN's PS were the only sound in the otherwise silent room. Taehyung stroked her hair in a gentle rhythm, his thumb brushing against the WAPMSK and on her cheek. The men at the table shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their gazes darting between the unassuming sleeping figure and their unwavering leader. YN's best friend's mind was filled with questions. How long was this going on? Was she in trouble? Why hadn't she informed him? His gaze shifted to Taehyung, who remained concerned about the sudden interruption, never leaving the sleeping form in his epimus. The boss's confidence was unsettling. He stared at her with a pause $Euro$S. Venice that was both frightening and fascinating. Your wife, the friend managed to out, his voice full of disbelief and accusation. YN, wake up, he demanded, his voice becoming more agitated, but she remained unconcerned, wrapped in the Washington empathy and safety she had discovered in the most unexpected place. Taehyung slowly stood up, effortlessly sting YN in his epimus. She street red, blinking sleepily until her gaze fixed on her best friend's horrified expression. Her cheeks turned a P red as she realized where she was and who she was with. Oh, no, she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the sudden din of the room. Taehyung gently lowered her to her feet and WRPP on a around her Washington. Bringing her CLO his GRP was firm but comforting, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone in her revel at TION. It's true, she said softly, her eyes pleading for understanding. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. The room burst into a cacophony of whispers and shouts. The loyal soldiers exchanged confused glances, while the more experienced Mafia members leaned back in their chairs, amused by the drama unfolding in front of them. The best friend felt his world spin out of central, his mind reeling from the implications of this discovery. This changes nothing, Taehyung said, his voice cutting through the din like AKN. Our relationship is not your concern. You are here for the meeting, not for personal matters, he turned to face YN, his gaze and your knees. You should go, he said. Softly, his thumb tracing a small circle on her back. With a heavy heart, she nodded and pu at away from his ace. She took one final look at her best friend, the unspoken words hanging in the air between them. I'll explain, she whispered before leaving the room, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The friend felt rooted to the spot, his gaze following her until the door clicked shut. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, including shock, anger, betrayal, and fear. He wasn't sure which to address first. How could you keep this from me? He demanded, his voice breaking through the silence. Taehyung's smile never wavered. It's not your place to question our arrangement, he said, his voice low and yet angrious. Remember your loyalty. And remember who you are speaking to. The friend CLURONCHED. His fists and his jaw tinned. I am loyal, he said angrily. But she is my family, and if you hurt her. The Mafia boss let Ned back in his chair, a knowing look in his. If anyone's going to hurt her, it won't be me, he said, his tone conveying an unspoken THRAT. But if you be Eurotray, her trust or mine, the consequences will be severe. Taehyung turned back to face his men, dismissing the friend. With a wave of his hand, the meeting resumed, the air THCK. With unspoken words and a sense of anger, the best friend felt a cold knot in his stomach, torn between his loyalty to Taehyung and his fierce protectiveness of YN. He knew he couldn't ignore what he'd just seen, but he also knew that pushing to HRD could put her in even greater DNG. As the night progressed, the whispers became louder and the glances more pointed. The best friends sat in the corner, ping WH Sky, and observing the interactions of the Mafia members. They were a close-knit group, a family united by blood and loyalty, and he had always felt like a part of it. But now he felt like an outsider, clutching a secret that could jeopardize the fragile trust they had all built over time. Waited in the hallway outside the meeting room, her heart racing in her chest. She knew she had to confront her best friend and tell him the truth, but she wasn't sure he'd ever understand the intricate web she'd been forced to weave. Taehyung had found her when she had nowhere else to go and provided her with a home and purpose within his empire. Their love had blossomed in secret, like a forbidden fruit that had become too sweet to resist. When the meeting ended, the heavy oak doors swung open, and Taehyung appeared. He scanned the room until his gaze fell on her, then the copyright coned her CL Sear with a arcade smile. The friend watched as YN approached, her head bowed and her eyes filled with both fear and love. He had never seen this side of her before, and it gave him a strange ache in his chest. Take her home, Taehyung instructed one of his men, his gaze never leaving YN's, and make sure she's safe. He turned and disappeared into the hallway's shadows, leaving her alone with the friend whose world she had just shattered. As he approached her, the friend stood, his glass SLSHING with WH Sky. What the H-pound lines, YN? He said, barely audible. How could you marry him? He's a monster. YN's eyes searched his, helping to catch a glimpse of the understanding she saw the dollar apparently needed. He's not what you think, she explained, her voice shaking. He's different with me. Her words hung in the air as a challenge and confession. The friend took a deep breath, his thoughts racing. You need to leave, he finally said. This isn't the life for you. But YN just shook her head, a fierce determination shining in her eyes. I can't, she whispered. This is my life right now, and if you can't accept that, Perhaps we're not as close as I thought. The words stung, but the best friend knew she was correct. He had been living in a bubble, ignoring the harsh realities of the world into which they had both been born. As he watched her walk away, accompanied by one of Taehyung's men, he realized their friendship would never be the same. The Mafia's world was full of secrets and shadows, and YN had chosen her place. Within it, the next few days were a blur of tense, on-end, unanswered questions. In and her best friend avoided each other, the gap between them widening with each passing hour. Taehyung attempted to fill the void with kind gestures and whispered reassurances, but the friend's rejection of their relationship weighed heavily on her heart. One night, unable to bear the silence any longer, she sought out her friend, who was sitting in his usual spot at the local bar, nursing his pain with a bottle of cheap whiskey. "I had to tell you," she explained, her voice barely audible above the jukebox. "I couldn't keep it from you forever." He glanced up, his eyes the shot and unted. "Why didn't you come to me?" he inquired, his voice raw. "You know I would have done anything for you." YN took a key breath. "I know," she replied. "But I also know how this life affects people. I did not want you to be hurt." The friend put down his glass, his hand trembling slightly. "This isn't just about you, YN," he said, his voice full of frustration. "What happens to you affects those around you. You are my family." YN nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I know," she whispered, "and I'm sorry." She took a deep breath, bracing herself for what she would say next. "But I love him, and I made a decision." Her friend looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. He then stood up, sighing, pound fly. "I can't be a part of this," he exclaimed, his voice cracking. "I won't watch you throw your life away." He turned to leave, but YNGRATBD at his arm. "Please," she begged, her voice shaking. "You're all I have left." He paused, looking into her eyes. "I'm still your friend, YN," he admitted finally. "But you have to be careful. This life is not a fairy tale." She released him with a nod, watching him disappear into the night. Without him, the bar felt colder and less crowded. She knew he was correct. This was not a fairy tale. It was a world of be it anger and secrets, and love was frequently the most pound upon of all. In the days that followed, Wyatt immersed herself in her Mafia work, attempting to ignore the sadness that had crept into her heart. Taehyung noticed the difference in her from the way she flinched at the sound of his footsteps to the distance in her eyes when he tried to hold her. He knew he needed to re-establish her friend's trust for both her and his own sake. He scheduled a meeting with the friend, a rare gesture that meant a lot to the men who had known them for years. They sat in Taehyung's office, the walls covered in books and the air heavy with the scent of leather and power. "I know you're worried about her," Taehyung said, his tone measured. "But she's where she's meant to be." As his rage boiled to the surface, the friend scoffed. "Meant to be on the arm of a killer," he spat. Taehyung let Ned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the other man's face. "Love doesn't come with a manual," he said quietly. "It's messy and complicated, particularly in our world. But I swear to you, I will protect her with everything I am, with my life." The friend examined him for any signs of insincerity, but all he saw was a man willing to do anything for the woman he loved. He gave a reluctant nod. "I'll give you one chance," he replied. "But if you hurt her..." Taehyung's smile was cold and deadly. "You don't need to remind me of the consequences," he told me, "because if anyone ever tries to hurt her again, I will not just risk my life, well, and theirs, Their understanding was clear. The friend left the office feeling both angry and relieved. He didn't trust Taehyung completely. But for now, he had to accept that this was YN's decision, and he had to find a way to support her without jeopardizing his own principles. The weeks turned into months, and the tension between YN, her best friend, and Taehyung became more in pound knees with each passing day. They performed a delicate dance of loyalty and love, each step fraught with dead anger. In knew she was on a tightrope, juggling her friendship and marriage, her heart and her survival. Taehyung approached her one evening while she sat quietly in their home, his steps soft on the plush carpet. "You're unhappy," he said, his voice heavy with concern. YN looked up, her eyes glistening from tears. "I'm just confused," she explained. "I love you, but I miss him too." Taehyung took a deep breath and brought his hand up to cup her cheek. "I know," he replied, "but we are in this together, and I will not let anyone come between us." Their eyes met, and she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the strange, secretive life they created together could be more than just a prison of lies and fear. Perhaps it could be a fortress of love, strong enough to withstand the inevitable storms. And as they stood there, the weight of their unspoken promises hanging in the air, YN knew she had made her decision. It was a perilous journey, full of obstacles she had never imagined facing, but she had chosen it willingly for love, and she would fight for it at any cost.